Hello and welcome to our last video in our Chapter 34 lecture series, where we're going to cover Section 4 on digestive system regulation. Our learning objectives are to discuss the role of neural regulation in digestive processes and explain how hormones regulate digestion. So we'll start off with the sight of food. We are able to see it, smell it. We can even think about food, and it can produce salivation by our salivary glands through stimulation of our autonomic nervous system. So our brain is really the control center of our hunger, and satiety, or how full we are and satisfied we are. So our digestive system is going to start regulating it through neural and hormonal responses. So while we're producing all the saliva through our salivary glands, at the same time, our stomach is getting ready to digest food too, even before the food has entered our body. So our stomach produces that hydrochloric acid, and then our brain is getting our muscles ready for peristalsis within the esophagus, the small intestines, and so on. So then our food is eaten and our stomach is full, and our brain is going to detect that we now have our satiety, and we send signals of fullness. So all of this is happening through 3 overlapping phases of gastric control, including our cephalic phase, which cephalic means head, so think more of our thoughts, our brain, and then our gastric phase, gastro refers to stomach, and then our intestinal phase, which of course refers to the intestines. So let's look at each of those phases that are going to require many enzymes and neural input as well. So we'll start off with our cephalic phase, and this is a reflex that is just initiated by the thought of food. So if you are hungry or haven't recently eaten, if you think of some of your favorite foods, we're going to have our higher brain regions relay vagal stimulation, and vagal stimulation is referring to a cranial nerve that is going to come off of the medulla oblongata called the vagus nerve that is going to move down and start increasing motility, so more of that muscle contraction, and secretory activity, so secreting hydrochloric acid and activating pepsin and all of that within the stomach. And in that way, we might have the stomach start growling as it's churning and getting ready to eat food. Next is our gastric phase. So in this phase, we have ingested the food, and that bolus has now entered our stomach. So we start to have stretch receptors here and activate, and we have a gastric reflex. Those stretch receptors are called baroreceptors. And we also have some chemoreceptors here in the stomach that can detect the protein that we have within the stomach and start increasing our motility and secretory activity. Now note that some of our food that moves into the stomach, it's going to have a higher pH. It's going to be either slightly acidic or alkaline as it enters the stomach. So the stomach can also sense that our pH has changed, and this in turn will also increase motility and secretory activity. We also have a hormone that's released called gastrin that is going to further stimulate the contraction of the muscles here and release more hydrochloric acid. So we're going to get contraction of our pyloric sphincter, our gatekeeper here, to keep all of this content in the stomach so that we can churn and chemically digest the chyme, and then it'll slowly relax to allow a little bit of chyme into the intestines slowly. Lastly, we have our intestinal phase, and this is when in the stomach we are going to start having more of an empty stomach because all of the food has now moved into the intestines. So we call this an intestinal reflex. So we get negative signals from the vagal response telling us that, oh, we have no food in here, so we need to decrease motility and secretory activity in the stomach. Whereas within our intestines, we are going to start sensing things like a change in pH and a stretching within the duodenum that then is going to have have two hormones released, are cholecystokinin, also known as CCK, and secretin, that will communicate with the stomach and also tell it to decrease motility and secretory activity. Let's review some of the hormones we talked about. So first, let's discuss secretin. This is a peptide hormone, so it's water soluble, and it's going to regulate our water homeostasis throughout the body and influence the environment of the duodenum by regulating secretions in the stomach and the pancreas. So as we said in the previous slide, when we're in that intestinal phase, we are sensing the food has moved on, so we want to decrease that motility and secretion within the stomach. We also will signal over to our pancreas to tell it to start secreting digestive enzymes. Another hormone we mentioned was CCK, or cholecystokinin, and this is a peptide hormone as well, and it is responsible for stimulating digestion of fat and protein. So it too is released by the small intestines, and we can sense the amount of fat and protein that moves into the duodenum. And we mentioned gastrin. Gastrin is a peptide hormone as well. It's stimulating secretion of the gastric acid or hydrochloric acid by the parietal cells within the stomach. And we know that that is going to aid in activating pepsin and therefore protein digestion. And it also aids in gastric motility. Now, when the stomach is empty, like we said, the food moves into the intestines. We also are going to secrete somatostatin, and this stops the release of hydrochloric acid so that we can decrease the acidity of the stomach. Yes, the stomach is still acidic, but it's to a lesser extent. And this is all controlled through a negative feedback loop based on if we have the food or macromolecules present within the stomach or the intestines. Another hormonal response to the composition of food is going to be with our lipids. And because they take a long time to digest, we are going to secrete a hormone known as gastric inhibitory peptide that's secreted by our small intestines, and it slows down the peristaltic movements so that we can take our time digesting and absorbing the lipids. And a lot of people have been researching this peptide because what they find is some people have a hypersecretion of GIP because of the excessive fat intake, and then therefore we are going to increase nutrient uptake into our adipocytes or our fat cells, and that leads to obesity, which then leads to insulin resistance, and that causes us to have hyperinsulinemia, meaning that our pancreas is going to make more insulin in order to overcome the resistance, and this leads to the higher levels of insulin within our blood. This then can cause somebody to have hypoglycemia, meaning that they have low blood sugar levels because insulin is moving all of the glucose into the cells. And of course, is then going to affect the body and cause symptoms like shakiness, sweating, headache, nausea, an uneven heartbeat, fatigue, dizziness, lightheadedness, and a host of some other symptoms.